Well, thank you. When Gary asked me to talk about herbs, I said, okay, I've grown a few, but I don't know that much. Learned a lot along the way. And a friend of ours from Master Gardener, Patricia Bosch, loaned me a fabulous book on herbs, which was very useful as well. So the first question I have for you is it herb or herb or herb? Depends on where you live. There are various explanations as to why those pronunciations have happened. One is that herb came to America first and then traveled back to Britain and became herb, which they often leave out the R. There are others that just say that people don't know how to pronounce things or that it has changed over time. So I don't know. Depends on where you're from and how you like to say it. Either way, an herb by any name still tastes great. So what is an herb? So here are some choices. A small seed-bearing plant with fleshy rather than woody parts. Something you use to cook with. A plant used for therapeutic properties. Herbaceous perennials plus trees, shrubs, annuals, lianas, and more primitive plants such as ferns, mosses, algae, lichen, and fungi. A plant that's always aromatic, one that's used for flavoring or scent as well as healing, or it always has flowers. Well, it's quite an interesting question. So what is an herb? Apparently, it depends. Here's one definition from the dictionary. Botany, a seed-producing annual, biennial, or perennial that does not develop persistent woody tissue but dies down at the end of a growing season. Or 2, a plant or plant part valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic qualities. She planted parsley, basil, in her herb garden. Well, so I have another question for you. What's the difference between an herb and a spice? Let me confuse you. Merriam-Webster says one of the simple definitions is leaves versus seeds. They said that's simple, but not always accurate. So black pepper, is that an herb or is it a spice? Black pepper is a berry from an Indian vine, which is dried, and we usually find it on the spice aisle. Chili pepper from South America is a fruit, but no relation to black pepper. We think of both of them as belonging on the spice aisle, unless, of course, the chili pepper is fresh. Cinnamon is not a leaf, fruit, or seed, but it is bark, and we find it on the spice aisle. Ginger root and turmeric root are rhizomes, and
sorry, I'm trying to listen to something. I'm trying to the speaker.
When they're fresh on the produce, when they're fresh, we find them on the produce aisle. But when they're dried, we find them on the spice aisle. Then there's saffron. The stamens of saffron are what make up saffron that we buy as a herb or spice. It takes 150 to 200 flowers to make a gram, and that's about $160 an ounce. There's cloves and star anise, which are dried flower buds of evergreen trees. There's garlic, which is a bulb. There's cilantro, which is leafy, but its seed is coriander, which is often considered a spice. By the botanical definition, banana trees, which can grow up to 20 feet tall, are technically herbs because they die down every year. Cumin comes from a plant that is botanically an herb. So what is an herb? It depends. Merriam-Webster's conclusion is complicated, and they really didn't have a clear-cut definition. So we're going to go with the best we can do, and I would like to talk tonight about culinary herbs, which will at least limit our scope somewhat. So when we think about it, herbs take us around the world. Cilantro and chilies take us to Mexico. Star anise, fennel, peppercorns, ground cinnamon, and whole cloves take us to China with 5-spice powder. Thai basil, galangal, which is a rhizome, Thai bird's eye chili, tamarind, kaffir lime take us to Thailand. Cumin, cardamom, turmeric, coriander, cinnamon, chilies, mustard seeds, fenugreek, tamarind, star anise, and asafoetida, which is a dried sap, take us to India. Cumin, nutmeg, cardamom, turmeric, sumac, which is a berry, caraway, seed, anise seed, allspice, cinnamon, parsley, and mint take us to the Middle East. Then there's berbere, which is made of cinnamon, cardamom, black peppercorn, cumin, fenugreek, and ginger. That takes us to Ethiopia. Basil, oregano, thyme, garlic, parsley, juniper berries, saffron, rosemary take us to Italy and much of that Mediterranean area. Marjoram, rosemary, thyme, lavender, nutmeg, saffron take us to France. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, as the song says, make us think of England. So when I think of culinary herb, I think of an herb garden. I think many of us do. And so my question is, where did we get our concept of herb gardens from? And one of the answers, as I did research, is our herb garden concepts as we experience them, at least in the West, originate from early Egyptian, Christian, and Islamic religious traditions. They were closely associated with buildings, orderly economic use of space. The early Egyptian gardens were done at least 4,000 years ago. They were often around temples. They had herbs and flowers for sacred service. It says that Queen Hatshepsut, which was about 1473 BC to 1458, had frankincense and myrrh as part of her supplies. There were cornflowers, poppies, mandrakes, figs, lotuses, and wall paintings. And chamomile was identified by pollen analysis as the main herb constituent in the embalming oil that was used to mummify Ramses II. Here's another Egyptian herb garden drawing. Early Egyptian herb gardens, this is often had a pool of water, and they had blue lotuses as well as other trees and herbs around them. The early Islamic gardens, the paradise was seen as an enclosed garden with cool shade and water and exquisite flowers and fruits. It generally contained jasmine, roses, lilies, trees such as apricots, pomegranates, and almonds, and it was often hedged with myrtle. The early Christians, they can trace it back to about 300, first monastery garden, and that shortly became almost a monastic regime. It was a small enclosed garden with a water supply. By 540 AD, gardening was second only to prayer, as they considered it. Had vegetables, fruits, vines, herbs, dye plants, and aromatics for incense. Here's another drawing of one of those settings. Here's another monastery garden, or a couple of them here. The medieval garden often included herbs for medicinal use, and we have a picture of a doctor gathering herbs here for medicinal purposes. The physics garden was 13th century. They said most large houses grew a wide variety of herbs. Small properties surrounded by orchard grass and kitchen garden with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. It's more of your gardens from that era. In the 16th century, universities planted herb gardens for teaching botany and medicine, and they became inextricably linked until the 18th century. This is from Cambridge. And then in 17th and 18th century, formal gardens became quite a thing. And some of the finest were from France. This is the Chateau, I don't know French, Philandry, box gardens and potager gardens, which meant the kitchen garden. They were extensive and elaborately kept. In the 19th century, public gardens became a concept that was used. And just as a point, obviously, our Western gardens don't necessarily include everything that's happened. When you look back to Mexico City and the floating gardens, that was an amazing concept. These were made with reed walls and reed and mud mat and willow trees that anchored them. It's just a fabulous concept. Of course, we have Chinese and Japanese gardens, which have shaped our concepts of what gardens ought to be. Then you have our current herb gardens in wide variety. This is a privacy screen and herb bed from London. And I'll just take you through, and of course, there's an herb windowsill, if you will, an herb garden, or a wall, or a collection of pots, or a wall of pots, or even using a pallet as your herb garden basis. So our common culinary herbs: basil, bay, laurel, borage, caraway, catnip, chervil, chives, cilantro, dill, espazote, which is a Mexican herb, fennel, garlic, lavender, lemongrass, lemon balm, lavage, sweet marjoram, mint, nasturtium, parsley, Greek oregano, rosemary, sage, winter and summer savory, scented geraniums, French sorrel, French tarragon, and thyme are some of our most common ones. So we mentioned the saffron. And another concept that I think we use quite frequently is herbs in rock gardens. And lavender, hyssop, sage, oregano, savory, curry herb, any herb from the Mediterranean area that grows in dry, rocky areas thrives in rock gardens and makes some beautiful settings. So let's look at some of these herbs and some of the basic requirements that they need. Oregano can grow out indoors from seed, and you can begin harvest in 3 months. And just put it in a sunny window with airy, light, well-drained soil. Liquid fertilizer or compost, and if it needs some humidity, you can put it on a tray with pebbles and water for humidity. Basil is one of the easiest to grow indoors. One of our friends who market gardens describes the need as hot and rich. It likes moist, well-drained soil. It's native to Asia. Genovese, Italian basil, purple basil, which is more licorice-like. Lemon basil is popular with Asian dishes due to its citrus-like flavor. I've grown Thai basil, which is very nice with Thai dishes. Its flavor becomes stronger if it flowers and can become perhaps a bit bitter. I went to talk several years ago by a man who grows basil for market exclusively, and he said they are always very careful to shear the basil so that it does not flower because of the change of taste. It likes an inch of water a week. Outdoors, it likes 6 hours of full sun. Indoors, 12 hours with fluorescent. 70% or higher, and mist if it's needed. It only needs fertilizer if it's not growing adequately. And good air circulation is important to prevent fungal disease. Sage, common garden sage is what's most commonly used for culinary purposes. It's a perennial, and it will live for 15 to 20 years. It's often people replace it in 3 to 4 years because the late leaves are the most flavorful during that time. It becomes woody. Leaves can be used dry, as with basil and the others. It's well-drained. It likes well-drained, rich clay loam. It likes full sun and warm temperatures. It's very drought tolerant. It prefers light, moist soil. Sow the seed after danger of frost. And prune it early spring to promote growth. I'm trying to move this so I can see my bottom line here, but I guess I'm not going to. Best harvested before flowering when the oil is highest. It may get galls that are caused by bacteria, so it's best to find plant disease-free plants, and it can spread that to nearby mint plants. I will say I got a snippet of sage several years ago, stuck it in a bit of potting soil, set it outside, and it rooted itself nicely over the winter. Rosemary is quite easy to grow. Its scented version is best for culinary. It has excellent flavor and soft leaves, and the flowers can be used in salads. It can be grown in pots or in an herb garden. It can be grown as a perennial or as an annual. It needs a minimum of 6 hours of sun, and full sun is preferable. Likes loamy, well-drained, slightly acidic soil of 6 to 7 pH. It's best grown from cuttings or transplants because the germination rate from seed is 15%. Put 1 or 2 in a pot on a windowsill with indirect sun if you want to grow it inside for 6 to 7 at 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and water the cuttings just to keep them moist. In about 8 weeks, it should be rooted and ready for transplant. It's fairly drought resistant. Water maybe once every 2 weeks. It seldom needs fertilizer. It's prone to root rot if it's overwatered, and it's fairly resistant to disease. Thyme, so many different kinds, over 350 varieties. It's especially good for rock gardens, walls, and containers. The flowers have copious nectar. When our thyme is in bloom, the bees are just swarming it. They are just thrilled with it. English thyme is a classic culinary thyme. It needs full sun. It needs soil that's well amended with organic matter and well drained. It's deer resistant, drought resistant, ground cover, slope erosion for control. It doesn't like roots, wet roots, and it's prone to root rot. Cilantro is perfect for our climate. I've learned a lot in growing that here. It prefers 50 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It can tolerate as low as 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which has been surprising when I've gone out when we've had freezing temperatures and seen it doing just fine. It will bolt at temperatures over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It likes light, well-drained, moderately fertile soil. It likes loam or sandy soil. Water it, especially during seed germination and establishment. Afterwards, that's not so important. You can fertilize it maybe twice in its lifetime. You can plant it and I will say I've never fertilized ours. Our soil tends to be rich in organic matter, and it seems to thrive. We plant it every week or two if you want a continuous harvest, because it will bolt, and when it starts to flower, the flavor will change again. So you can allow it to bolt and save seed, and then you have coriander. Flowers are also edible, and you can find some varieties that are slow bolt or long-standing varieties. Texas A&M suggests using corn gluten around on the soil pre-planting, or using vinegar and 20% vinegar and clove oil and cinnamon oil for weed control. That was a new one to me. Summer savory grows 12 inches tall. I hadn't run across that until Art introduced us to this summer. It's a fast-growing annual. Plant it in the spring. You can direct sow, or you can start it in plots. And it likes our temperatures again, 60 to 85 degrees. Keep the soil moist, but not wet. Its leaves are most flavorful. Again, as you hear, this is a repeated theme just prior to flowering. It can be used fresh or dried, but it's best fresh. It's one of the main herbs of Herbes de Provence, and it likes full direct sun. If you're going to do it indoors, it needs a bright window with southern light. It's not fussy, but it likes alkaline, well-drained soil. If you prune it, you can pinch it back just before the first node to encourage growth, and it will make it more bushy too. It will reseed, or you can propagate it from cuttings. It's a close relative to winter savory. If you look in the picture on your lower left, the back pot is winter savory, the front is summer savory, but winter savory is less desired for seasoning. Then mint. There's peppermint, spearmint, apple mint, chocolate mint, orange mint, pineapple mint, and a whole lot of others. They like full sun and warm temperatures. It's very drought tolerant. It spreads by rhizomes, and it can become invasive. We have a friend who had a beautiful manicured garden, except for his mint that constantly was taking over. It was a constant battle. You can harvest it when the stems are 6 to 8 inches long. If you're not harvesting it regularly, then shear it mid-season, and that will keep it from getting so leggy. Lemon balm is a part of the mint family. It has a different taste, and unfortunately, it's in our demonstration garden, and we're finding it there continuously. It grows well in containers, and don't put it where the stem can touch the ground, because that may root. It prefers to be ground cover, so it's going to spread. And if you're going to plant it outside, plant it in pots or between paved areas, and that can help control the spread. You can propagate by seeds or cuttings, and it will overwinter. Just cover the leaves or mulch, and I think it's hard to kill anyway. Catmint. Okay, so it is used. It can be steeped in tea. It has a mild minty taste. The young leaves are good for salads. Older leaves are cooked dishes, but truthfully, I've just put this in because I love the pictures. They're so gorgeous. The sunny location, and it tolerates partial shade. It likes well-drained but not overly fertile soil. There's several kinds I included here. You can see that they're all pretty wide plants. But the shortest one is the Select Blue, and they are pretty sturdy. You can propagate those by cuttings or by slicing a vertical section of an established clump. And they said to divide every 3 to 4 years to keep it vigorous. As far as culinary uses, there are some cautions for women that should be noted before you try using those. They're untroubled by pests, and it repels a number of creatures. French tarragon has a highly aromatic, subtle licorice flavor. That's the preferred version for culinary uses. It's used in many French dishes. People tend to either love or hate it, depending on whether they like licorice. I happen to be in the latter category. I hate it. Yeah. Perennial. It's not as good as a dried herb. Again, over and over, you will see the concept that fresh herbs are far better, and often added late in your cooking time also, so that the oils don't evaporate. You can't start it from seed. I was not able to find out why, but that was what was said. It was dappled. It likes dappled or early morning sun only. Prune it regularly to keep it from flowering. Same reason. It's hardy in zones 4 and above. If you're in colder climates, mulch in late fall to protect the roots. And divide every 3 to 4 years in spring or fall, and propagate from root or stem cuttings. Dill, I think most of us have had dill. It's a carrot family. It needs 6 to 8 hours of sun. It's an easy carrot plant. It likes well-drained, slightly acidic soil, rich in organic matter. It does not transplant easily, and it doesn't need frequent fertilizing, maybe only a light one once in the spring of a 5-10-5 or an organic equivalent. If grown outdoors in containers or indoors, you may want to feed it half-strength liquid fertilizer every 4 to 6 weeks. Harvest green foliage, and here you go again, anytime prior to the flowers appearing. And then you can grow it indoors with enough light. If you want to harvest the seeds, cut the flower heads just before they begin to ripen and turn tan. You can harvest several crops by making plantings 2 to 3 weeks apart. And again, drying causes the loss of most flavor. You can hang it upside down to dry it, as you can with other herbs here. Parsley comes in several varieties. Curly parsley is most often grown. It's good for borders for interplanting in the garden, for indoor and outdoor containers. It's a pretty easy plant. Flat leaf parsley, Italian parsley, has a stronger, sweeter flavor that's good for cooking. I really like that. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall, and it can get gangly. Hamburg parsley has a white parsnip-like roots used in flavoring for soups. And Japanese parsley looks rather like Italian parsley, but it's more bitter, and it's used in Asian cooking. It likes a well-drained soil, rich in organic matter. It likes sun, and 6 to 7 pH is preferred. You can start it indoors or outdoors. If you're going to start it indoors, or either way, I would say soak the seed for 24 hours to speed up germination before planting. I have even at times been told to pour boiling water on it, which we did once, and that worked fine too. Direct seeding works well. That's what the University of Minnesota says. I haven't had that experience. It's slow to germinate. Water deeply once a week, and don't let it dry out. Fertilize it 1 to 2 times per growing season. That's what University of Minnesota says. I've never fertilized ours, and it seems to do very nicely. And so maybe there's just enough, as we are organic, there's enough there. Mulch for moisture and weed control. And for inside and container grown, fertilize it half-strength liquid fertilizer weekly. You can harvest, they suggested, by snipping the outer stems nearer the ground. Did better. It's a biennial, so let it continue through the winter and into the spring till it brings seed. Again, fresh has the best flavor. Garlic chives are perennial in the onion family. It's to plant in evenly drained, moist soil. It likes sun or partial shade. In fact, ours planted in the garden this last spring was overshaded by several plants, and it still did quite nicely. Plant as soon as the seed is ripe in the fall or in a cold frame in the spring. The bulbs can be divided and planted in the spring. It will self-seed aggressively. You can control that by deadheading it and the leaves can be harvested anytime. Edible white flowers or pink can be picked shortly after opening, and it can be container grown. Marjoram, often sweet marjoram, is what we think of as the culinary one that we use. It started indoors in late spring or late winter, early spring. You can transplant it after all danger of frost is past. It's quite tender, and when ours was out in our herb bed and frost came, that was the end of it. Grow it inside in a container or outside in garden soil. It likes full sun, light, well-drained soil. Occasional watering, it's drought tolerant, which I can attest to. It's a great beginner herb. Pick before buds because, again, best flavor then. It can be bitter after the flowers open. Now, fennel is an interesting plant. It's a tender perennial. So for all purposes, it's an annual. It grows beautiful bulbs. It has a strong anise flavor. It likes moist, acidic soil, 5.5 to 6.8 pH. Water when it's dry down an inch. Avoid waterlogging. It does not like that. Planted in the spring after danger of frost is past. Sunny location with good soil drainage. And be prepared if you've not grown it before. It can grow 4 to 6 feet tall and 1.5 to 3 feet wide. Plan on that mature height. That was something I was not aware of when I planted that in our garden. So it did kind of crowd out some other things. Don't plant it near dill or coriander due to the cross-pollination that can affect the flavor. And it can inhibit the growth of tomatoes and beans. Lemongrass I decided to grow a couple years ago because I had a friend whose husband was from Tonga and she made a dish with lemongrass, and I thought, I like this. It's a native to India. It likes full sun. It likes heat. The timing is similar for planting tomatoes. It's very frost sensitive, so bring it indoors before temps hit 40s. It likes rich, loamy soil, neutral pH. It can offer curb appeal as well. It turns burgundy and red in the autumn. Though it may spread aggressively. So for us, we chose to keep it in a greenhouse. The ASPCA says it's toxic to dogs and cats. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall. It's fragrant and it's pest repellent. It will tolerate drought after being established and shear at the end of the winter. The reason they said was to leave it so that it was formed a bit of a mulch during the winter, a little insulation. It's easy to propagate. You can divide the bulb-like base and can cut. It can get root fungus in some areas. And it grows well indoors. And lavender, yes, it's used for food. It's part of the herbs de Provence. It's used in teas, but truthfully, I think it's especially food for the soul. It's native to Europe. It's full sun, well-drained soil, low to moderate fertility. Don't amend it with organic matter. It's neutral to slightly alkaline soil. Lime it to a pH of 7 or consider a soil test. Space 1 to 3 feet apart and 2 to 3 feet tall. It can be 2 to 4 feet wide. Fall planting in zone 6 and up allows for root establishment. It declines in 10 years. It can be very tolerant. If you over-fertilize, you may not get as many blooms. If you're using potting soil, add some sand for drainage. A little goes a long way. And it's toxic to pets, cats and dogs, but it is fabulous for bees and often grown to help with honeybees. So it's just worth having. So if you'd like to overwinter some of those herbs, some of these, and there are others in there I just didn't mention, you can dig from the garden: chives, parsley, thyme, oregano, rosemary. And some you want to start from the small plant or seed or cuttings: basil, lemon balm, mint, shiso, tarragon, and cilantro. The basil, you may find some live basil in the store and just want to bring it in, pull it apart, pull it into sections, and put it in your pots from there. Just something to enjoy and carry the summer on and the fresh herbs on. So enjoy your fresh herbs all year long and have a blast.